The morning sun crested over the eastern ridge of Caldwell Valley, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Ryan Caldwell was already awake, as he had been for 2 hours. It was a habit he'd never managed to break after 16 years in the Army. For a clock wake-up, regardless of when he'd fallen asleep. Some patterns were etched too deep to erase. He stood on his porch, steaming coffee mug in hand, scanning the horizon with eyes that missed nothing. The valley stretched before him, 2 miles wide at its broadest point, narrowing to less than half a mile at the southern pass that led toward the Mexican border 28 miles away. It wasn't on any official maps as Caldwell Valley, but the locals had taken to calling it that. Ryan had never corrected them. Echo, his Belgian Malinois, padded silently to his side, ears perked. Ryan reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Nothing yet, girl," he murmured. "Just another quiet morning." But they both knew better. Quiet mornings in this part of Arizona were becoming increasingly rare. Ryan's property covered 320 acres of the valley's northern section, strategically positioned where the land pinched between two steep ridgelines. He hadn't chosen this location by accident. After 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, Ryan had developed an instinctive eye for defensible terrain. The property had been affordable because most people saw only isolation and hardship. Ryan had seen a natural choke point. He drained his coffee and went inside to prepare for the day. The ranch house was modest, 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen and living area, and a wraparound porch that offered 270-degree visibility. What visitors didn't see were the reinforced walls, the bulletproof windows, the hidden gun safes, or the solar-powered security system that monitored every approach to the property. Ryan changed into worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, his standard ranching attire. Few who saw him would connect this quiet, unassuming rancher with Master Sergeant Ryan Caldwell, recipient of the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and holder of the 7th longest confirmed kill in U.S. military history at 2,431 yards. Ryan preferred it that way. His daily routine never varied. Check the livestock, 16 head of cattle that provided a legitimate reason for his presence in the valley. Maintain the fences. Monitor the water sources. To anyone watching, he was simply a hard-working rancher. The 2-hour training regimen in his barn converted him, the daily weapons maintenance, and his meticulous surveillance activities remained private. The rhythmic sound of splitting wood echoed through the valley as Ryan worked through a pile of oak logs. The physical labor helped quiet his mind. At 43, he remained in exceptional physical condition, 6-foot-tone with the lean, sinewy build of someone who worked hard every day. The flecks of gray at his temples and the network of fine lines around his eyes were the only obvious signs of age. The scars, 3 bullet wounds and countless others from shrapnel and hand-to-hand combat, remained hidden beneath his clothes. "Mornin', Caldwell." The voice carried from the dirt road that led to his house. Ryan recognized Sheriff Tom Harker's truck before he saw the man himself. He set down his axe and wiped the sweat from his brow. "Morning, Sheriff. What brings you all the way out here?" Harker, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a salt and pepper mustache, climbed out of his vehicle. "Just making rounds. Thought I'd check in." He nodded toward the horizon. "Heard anything unusual lately?" Ryan knew what he was really asking. Border Patrol had found 3 bodies last week, drug mules who'd apparently crossed the wrong people. "It's been quiet. Too quiet, maybe." Harker nodded, understanding the implication. "Well, keep your eyes open. Rumor has it the Sinaloa faction is pushing north, getting more aggressive with the smaller operators." "I always keep my eyes open," Ryan replied simply. The sheriff studied him for a moment. Like most locals, Harker knew bits and pieces of Ryan's background, enough to respect his capabilities, but not enough to know the full extent of his experience. "I know you do. That's why I sleep better knowing you're out here." After Harker left, Ryan returned to his workshop behind the barn. Unlike the house, which maintained the appearance of rustic simplicity, the workshop revealed his true nature. One wall held an array of firearms, from precision rifles to tactical shotguns. Another was covered with topographical maps of the surrounding 50 miles, with key terrain features, water sources, and potential cover marked in meticulous detail. A ham radio sat beside modern communications equipment, and a reinforced cabinet contained enough ammunition, medical supplies, and emergency rations to last months. Ryan sat at his workbench, disassembling and cleaning his primary rifle, a custom Remington 700.300 Winchester Magnum with a carbon fiber barrel and a Schmidt and Bender PMI scope. His hands moved with practiced precision, each component receiving the same focused attention he'd given countless times during his years as the primary designated marksman for his Special Forces unit. The memories washed over him as he worked. The mountains of Afghanistan's Kunar province, where he'd spent weeks on overwatch positions, protecting his team as they conducted counterinsurgency operations. The urban hellscape of Fallujah, where he'd provided cover during house-to-house clearings. The brutal sandstorms of Anbar province that could strip the skin from your face and clog a rifle in minutes if you weren't vigilant with maintenance. Most civilians thought snipers were just excellent shots. They didn't understand that marksmanship was perhaps the least important skill. The true art was in observation, patience, weather calculation, stealth, and the psychological fortitude to remain motionless for days while maintaining complete situational awareness. Ryan had excelled at all of these. His rifle clean, Ryan moved to the maps. He marked recent observations, tracks he'd found along the southern creek bed, a campsite he'd discovered in the western hills, unusual vehicle activity on the county road. Individually, they meant little. Together, they formed a pattern that his trained mind immediately recognized. Someone was conducting reconnaissance of the valley. The satellite phone on his workbench buzzed. Ryan picked it up, recognizing the number. Jackson, he answered, using his contact surname. Caldwell. The voice belonged to Border Patrol Agent Michael Jackson, one of the few people Ryan trusted. We picked up some chatter you should know about. Escobar's people mentioned your valley specifically. Called it the perfect corridor. Said the only obstacle was a gringo rancher. Ryan absorbed this without visible reaction. Carlos Escobar was the ruthless lieutenant who controlled the cartel's operations in this region. When? Intercept was yesterday. Movement expected within the week. Jackson paused. We're stretched thin, Caldwell. The new policies have half our agents reassigned to processing centers. If they come in force. I understand, Ryan said, his voice neutral. I'm not supposed to tell you this, Jackson continued, but there's a task force targeting Escobar. Making progress. If you can hold off any major moves for a few weeks. I appreciate the information, Ryan said. Stay safe. After ending the call, Ryan returned to his maps with new purpose. If Escobar had identified his valley as a potential trafficking route, observation had moved to the planning phase. Action would follow soon. Ryan needed to prepare. He spent the afternoon checking his early warning systems. Motion sensors disguised as natural features throughout the valley, cameras hidden in trees and rocks, tripwires in key locations. To the uninitiated, the valley appeared to be nothing more than beautiful, rugged wilderness. To Ryan, it was a carefully monitored defensive position with overlapping fields of fire and predetermined ranges to every significant landmark. As evening approached, Ryan saddled his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Sergeant, and rode the perimeter of his property. Echo loped alongside, occasionally ranging ahead to investigate interesting scents. The setting sun bathed the valley in golden light, highlighting the beauty that had first drawn Ryan to this place. After the chaos and destruction he'd witnessed overseas, the valley's isolated tranquility had been exactly what his fractured soul needed. He'd purchased the land 5 years ago, after his final tour. The nightmares had been bad then, vivid, blood-soaked memories that jerked him from sleep most nights. His marriage hadn't survived his deployments. Few did in special forces. The valley, with its clear sight lines and defensible position, had offered security for a man who'd spent too many years in places where danger lurked around every corner. "What do you think, Echo?" he asked as they paused on a western ridge, overlooking the valley below. The dog's ears twitched. "Yeah, I don't like it either." Ryan had known this day would come eventually. The valley was too perfect a route for smugglers to ignore forever. Its natural features provided cover from aerial surveillance, and the terrain was navigable by vehicles with decent ground clearance. The Border Patrol checkpoint on Highway 82 was 15 miles east, and the nearest one to the west was even further. At the southernmost point of his property, Ryan dismounted and knelt to examine fresh tire tracks, not from a ranch truck or Border Patrol vehicle. The tread pattern matched cartel vehicles he'd encountered during his work with joint anti-narcotics operations near the border. Reconnaissance, just as he'd suspected. Back at the ranch house, Ryan ate a simple dinner while reviewing satellite imagery of the surrounding area on his laptop. The darkness outside was complete, the kind of absolute blackness that only exists far from city lights. Most people found it oppressive. Ryan found it comforting. Darkness was a tool he'd learned to use to his advantage. After dinner, he changed into dark tactical pants and a black long-sleeve shirt. From a locked cabinet, he retrieved a plate carrier with ceramic inserts, night vision goggles, and a suppressed MK-18 carbine. Echo watched him with alert interest, recognizing the preparations. Ryan knelt beside the dog. "Just reconnaissance tonight, girl. We need to know what we're dealing with." He slipped out the back door and disappeared into the darkness with a silence born from thousands of hours of training and combat experience. Echo followed, her own movements equally ghost-like. Together, they made their way toward the southern pass where Ryan had found the tire tracks earlier. 3 hours later, Ryan had his answer. Hidden 2 miles beyond his property line, in a box canyon that branched off from the main valley, he discovered a staging area. Fresh cigarette butts, food wrappers with Spanish labels, and distinctive boot prints confirmed his suspicions. Based on the compressed ground and vehicle tracks, he estimated at least 15 men had used this location within the past 48 hours. Most concerning was what he found under a camouflage tarp, communications equipment more sophisticated than standard cartel operations typically employed. Someone had been monitoring radio traffic, possibly including his own property. Ryan photographed everything without disturbing the scene, then carefully withdrew. On his return journey, he placed additional sensors at strategic locations and repositioned 2 of his trail cameras to cover likely approach routes. If Escobar's men returned, Ryan would know. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten as Ryan and Echo arrived back at the ranch house. After securing his equipment, Ryan showered and changed into fresh clothes. He felt no fatigue despite the night's activities. His body had long ago adapted to operating on minimal sleep during high-stress situations. Over breakfast, he reviewed his options. He could contact Sheriff Harker, but local law enforcement wasn't equipped to handle a cartel incursion. Border Patrol was understaffed and spread thin. The FBI might take interest, but bureaucracy would slow any response. By the time official channels mobilized, it could be too late. Ryan understood what was happening. Escobar was testing defenses, gathering intelligence before committing to using the valley as a trafficking route. The cartel lieutenant's reputation for thoroughness was well known. He wouldn't move without understanding all potential obstacles, including the gringo rancher, who owned the strategic northern section. As he sipped his coffee, Ryan found his thoughts drifting to Sergeant Major Williams, his former commander. Williams had taught him an essential truth about asymmetric warfare. When outnumbered, let the terrain fight for you. The valley was Ryan's terrain. He knew every ridge, gully, and rock formation. He'd spent 5 years learning its moods through different seasons. If conflict came, that knowledge would be his greatest advantage. The ringing of his cell phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID showed Margaret Thornton, his nearest neighbor, whose ranch bordered his to the east. "Morning, Margaret," he answered. "Ryan." Her voice was tense. I found something you should see. Can you come over? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Margaret was in her 60s, a widow who ran the Thornton Ranch with grit and determination that had earned Ryan's respect. Her property wasn't as strategically positioned as his, but it covered a significant portion of the eastern approach to the valley. She was waiting on her porch when he arrived. Without preamble, she handed him a plastic bag containing a folded piece of paper. Found this nailed to my fence this morning. It's in Spanish, but I know a threat when I see one. Ryan unfolded the paper. The message was simple: sell now or bury family later. At the bottom was a crude drawing of a severed head. Standard cartel intimidation tactics. Have you called the sheriff? He asked. Margaret snorted. What's Tom going to do? File a report? I called you because you're the only one around here who understands what we're dealing with. Ryan nodded, respecting her directness. They're moving faster than I expected. Have you seen any unfamiliar vehicles? Anyone watching the property? My ranch hand Miguel spotted a black SUV parked on the county road yesterday. When he approached, it drove off. Keep your rifle close, Margaret. Lock up at night. If anything happens, anything at all, call me immediately, day or night. She studied him with shrewd eyes. You know more than you're saying. Ryan met her gaze. Yes. Are they coming through the valley? They're planning to, he admitted. I'm working on ensuring they reconsider. Margaret nodded slowly. My herald served in Vietnam. Never talked about it much, but I recognized that look in his eyes sometimes. Same look you get. She straightened her shoulders. This is our land, Ryan. We don't scare easy. No, ma'am, we don't. Ryan handed back the threatening note. Keep this somewhere safe. Evidence might matter later. As he drove back to his ranch, Ryan's mind shifted fully into operational planning mode. The threat to Margaret confirmed his assessment. Escobar was moving to clear obstacles, starting with intimidation. When that failed, violence would follow. The timeline had accelerated. Back at his workshop, Ryan pulled out a locked case from beneath his workbench. Inside was a satellite phone different from the one he used with Jackson. This one connected to a network few civilians knew existed. He hadn't used it since leaving the service, but maintained the account for emergencies. He dialed a memorized number and waited through several transfers before a familiar voice answered. This is Robinson. Colonel, it's Caldwell. A pause. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you again. Colonel James Robinson had been Ryan's commanding officer during his final years of service. I take it this isn't a social call. No, sir. I have a situation developing. Carlos Escobar's organization is preparing to open a new trafficking corridor through my location. Your retirement property? The valley you were always talking about. Yes, sir. The colonel's voice turned grave. Local authorities? Limited resources. Border Patrol is stretched thin. By the time official channels respond, it could be a bloodbath. What are you asking for, Caldwell? Ryan took a deep breath. Nothing official. Just wanted key people to know what's happening here, in case things go sideways. A long silence followed. I understand. Keep your head down, soldier. Always do, sir. Ryan knew what Robinson would do. Make discreet calls. Ensure that if violence erupted in Caldwell Valley, certain agencies would pay attention. It wasn't direct support, but it was something. The rest of the day passed in methodical preparation. Ryan serviced each of his firearms, checked his medical supplies, and repositioned critical resources to fallback locations throughout his property. By sunset, he had transformed his peaceful ranch into a hardened defensive position, with layered security measures and emergency protocols in place. As darkness fell, Ryan stood on his porch, watching the valley disappear into shadow. Echo sat beside him, alert and watchful. The tension in the air was palpable, like the electric stillness before a storm. They're coming, girl, he said softly. Sooner rather than later. The Belgian Malinois looked up at him, her intelligent eyes reflecting complete trust. Ryan had rescued Echo from a military working dog program where she'd been deemed too aggressive for regular handlers. He'd recognized something in her that others had missed, not aggression, but intensity and loyalty that required the right partnership to channel properly. Together, they would defend this valley. It wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. If Escobar established this corridor, the poison would flow north, destroying lives in countless communities. Ryan had spent his military career defending American interests overseas. Now the front line had come to his own backyard. As he turned to go inside, Ryan's satellite phone buzzed with a text message from Jackson. Movement confirmed. 48 hours max. Ryan nodded to himself. The waiting was almost over. Soon, Escobar would learn what every enemy who had underestimated Master Sergeant Ryan Caldwell eventually discovered, that some quiet men are quiet not from weakness, but because they've seen enough violence to know its true cost. And those men, when pushed to protect what matters, become the most dangerous adversaries of all. Ryan woke before his alarm, the faint vibration of his phone pulling him from a light sleep. The message from Jackson was brief. 6 vehicles spotted crossing at Nogales. Heading northwest. Matches Escobar's typical convoy formation. He slipped out of bed and dressed quickly in tactical pants and a moisture-wicking shirt. Echo was already alert, sensing his tension as he moved efficiently through his morning routine. Instead of coffee, he filled a hydration pack with water and added electrolyte tablets. Today would require sustained focus. The pre-dawn sky was still dark as Ryan made his way to the ridge overlooking the southern approach to his valley. He moved without a flashlight, his boots finding secure footing on the familiar trail. Echo padded silently beside him, occasionally ranging ahead to check for unfamiliar scents. At the observation point, a natural rock formation that offered excellent concealment while providing a commanding view of the valley floor, Ryan settled into position. He unpacked his spotting scope and began a systematic scan of the terrain below. The thermal imaging attachment allowed him to detect heat signatures that would be invisible to the naked eye. 2 hours passed in absolute stillness. Ryan's breathing remained slow and measured, his body relaxed despite the internal alertness that hummed through his nervous system. This was familiar territory for him. The long watch, the patient surveillance that had been his specialty during his military career. The first sign came just after sunrise, a dust cloud rising from the southern pass, too uniform to be natural. Ryan adjusted his scope, focusing on the source. A black SUV with tinted windows appeared, moving slowly along the dirt road that wound through the valley floor. Behind it, 2 more vehicles followed at precise intervals. Through his scope, Ryan could see 4 men in the lead vehicle, the driver, a passenger in the front seat, and 2 in the back. All wore tactical vests and carried what appeared to be automatic weapons. Not drug mules or low-level operators. These were trained security personnel conducting a professional reconnaissance. Ryan activated a small recording device, documenting the vehicle's movements while maintaining his own invisibility. The convoy proceeded methodically, stopping at several points for the occupants to exit and examine the terrain. At one location, approximately 2 miles from Ryan's property line, they deployed what looked like electronic detection equipment, sweeping for surveillance devices. Smart, Ryan murmured to himself. Echo's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she remained perfectly still beside him. The cartel was checking for law enforcement surveillance before committing to the route. Standard counterintelligence procedure, executed with military precision. This wasn't typical cartel behavior. Whoever was leading this operation had professional training. The convoy continued north until it reached the boundary of Ryan's property, marked by a simple barbed wire fence with no trespassing signs posted at regular intervals. The vehicle stopped. Through his scope, Ryan watched as a man exited the second SUV. Even at this distance, something about the man's bearing identified him as the leader. Tall, with broad shoulders and a confident stride, he surveyed the property line with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing tactical situations. He pointed toward various features: the ridge where Ryan was hiding, the ranch house in the distance, the eastern and western approaches. Ryan adjusted his scope to maximum magnification, focusing on the man's face. The features matched the intelligence photos he'd seen of Carlos Escobar, the prominent scar running from his left eye to his jaw, the close-cropped black hair, the cold efficiency in his movements. This wasn't just an advanced team. The cartel lieutenant was personally overseeing the reconnaissance. After 15 minutes of examination and discussion, the men returned to their vehicles. Instead of continuing north, the convoy turned around and headed back the way they had come. Ryan remained motionless, watching until the dust cloud disappeared behind the southern ridge. Only then did he pack his equipment and begin the careful descent back to his ranch house. His mind processed what he'd witnessed with the detached analysis of a professional intelligence officer. Escobar's personal involvement confirmed the seriousness of the operation. The electronic countermeasures equipment suggested they were concerned about detection. Most significantly, they had stopped at his property line rather than trespassing immediately, a calculated decision to gather intelligence before engagement. Back at the ranch house, Ryan radioed Jackson. Convoy confirmed. 6 vehicles, approximately 20 personnel. Escobar was present. Jackson's reply came through with a burst of static. Damn. If he's there personally, this is bigger than we thought. You need to consider evacuation, Caldwell. Negative, Ryan responded calmly. Send me whatever additional intelligence you have on Escobar's recent operations. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Roger that. But for the record, I think you're crazy to stay. Ryan allowed himself a grim smile. Noted. After signing off, Ryan moved to his workshop and activated his security protocols, a series of motion sensors and cameras strategically placed around his property. On a bank of monitors, he could now observe any approach from multiple angles. He then began methodically preparing his equipment, checking weapons, organizing ammunition, and packing specialized gear into mobile caches that could be accessed from various defensive positions. By midday, the expected intelligence from Jackson arrived via encrypted email. Ryan reviewed it carefully. Over the past 6 months, Escobar had systematically established new trafficking corridors through previously uncontested territories. The pattern was consistent. Initial reconnaissance, followed by pressure on local landowners, escalating to violence if necessary. Once a route was secured, a fortified way station would be established to manage logistics. What caught Ryan's attention was the tactical sophistication of these operations. The reports indicated precision that went beyond typical cartel methods. Escobar had reportedly recruited former Mexican Special Forces operators for his security detail, men with professional military training and experience. Ryan leaned back in his chair, absorbing this information. He wasn't facing untrained thugs. He was up against a well-resourced, professionally led force with specific objectives. In Afghanistan, he'd encountered similar situations. Insurgent groups led by former military officers who combined tactical training with a willingness to employ brutal methods. The distinctive rumble of a truck engine interrupted his thoughts. Ryan checked the security monitors and recognized Margaret Thornton's pickup approaching along the main road. He secured the sensitive intelligence materials before going outside to meet her. Margaret's expression was tense as she parked and stepped out of her vehicle. "They came to my house," she said without preamble. Ryan's posture shifted subtly, his senses heightening. "When?" "About an hour ago. 3 men in a black SUV. Very polite, very professional. Offered to buy my ranch for twice its market value." She handed him a business card. Said they represented a development company interested in agricultural investment opportunities. The card bore the logo of Sonoran Agricultural Enterprises with a Phoenix address and contact information. A professional front, typical of cartel money laundering operations. "What did you tell them?" Ryan asked, pocketing the card. "That the Thornton Ranch isn't for sale at any price." Margaret's voice carried the same steel that had helped her survive 40 years of ranching in harsh border country. "Then I asked them to leave. They did, but not before saying they'd give me time to reconsider because the offer wouldn't remain open indefinitely." Ryan nodded. They approached you first because you're seen as potentially more vulnerable. A widow running a large property alone. That's their first mistake, Margaret said grimly. Underestimating me. Did they say anything else? Mention any other properties or names? Nothing specific. But one of them was looking at a tablet with what looked like a map of the valley. I caught a glimpse of it. Your property was highlighted. This confirmed Ryan's assessment. Escobar was gathering information on all obstacles to his planned corridor. The offer to Margaret was the soft approach, money first, threats later. I appreciate you coming to tell me, Ryan said. For now, accept any calls from them. Be non-committal. Say you're thinking about their offer. The longer they believe there's a peaceful solution, the more time we have to prepare. Margaret studied his face. Prepare for what exactly? Ryan met her gaze directly. For when they stop asking nicely. After Margaret left, Ryan drove into town for the first time in weeks. The small community of Valverde consisted of little more than a general store, a gas station, a diner, and a handful of modest homes. It served as a gathering point for the scattered ranches and farms in the surrounding area. At the general store, Ryan purchased supplies while listening to the conversations around him. The cashier, Doris Wilson, had worked there for 30 years and was a reliable source of local information. Strangers been through here lately, she commented as she rang up his purchases. City folk, by the look of them. Asking questions about property values and land ownership. Ryan kept his expression neutral. What kind of questions? Wanted to know who owned what parcels out toward your way. Seemed particularly interested in the valley properties. Doris lowered her voice. Sheriff Tom wasn't too happy when I told him about it. Said to call him directly if they come back. Good advice, Ryan replied. I'd appreciate a call too, if you don't mind. Course, Ryan. You've always been good to us locals. She hesitated, then added, these fellows didn't seem like typical land developers. 2. Alert, if you know what I mean. Reminded me of my nephew when he came back from Iraq. Always watching. Ryan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Military bearing was difficult to disguise completely. Thanks, Doris. I'll keep an eye out. His next stop was the local diner, where he took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee. The place was half full, mostly with ranch hands and local workers on their lunch break. In the corner booth, Sheriff Harker was having lunch with a man Ryan didn't recognize, mid-30s, well-dressed in business casual attire that seemed out of place in the rural setting. Ryan watched their interaction in the reflection of the napkin dispenser. The conversation appeared tense, with Harker's body language growing increasingly defensive. When the sheriff noticed Ryan, he seemed to conclude the meeting quickly. The unknown man left, passing close to Ryan on his way out. Their eyes met briefly, a professional assessment passing between them in that split second. Harker joined Ryan at the counter, ordering a coffee refill. Caldwell, he acknowledged with a nod. Sheriff, Ryan replied. New friend. Harker grimaced. DEA agent Mercer. Just transferred to the regional office. Wanted to introduce himself and establish lines of communication. He made air quotes around the phrases. Translation, they're expanding operations in our area and wanted to let the local yokels know to stay out of their way. Ryan absorbed this information. DEA presence was increasing, which meant federal intelligence had also identified the potential new trafficking corridor. He say anything specific about ongoing operations? Nothing useful. Just bureaucratic territory marking. Harker sipped his coffee. But he did ask about you. Ryan kept his expression neutral. What about me? Wanted to know if the ex-military guy in Caldwell Valley had reported any suspicious activity. Said your name was on some watch list of potential cartel targets. This was concerning. If the DEA was aware of potential threats against him, but hadn't made direct contact, they might be using him as bait. Monitoring the situation to gather intelligence on Escobar's operations rather than intervening. I appreciate the heads up, Ryan said. Harker studied him for a moment. You know, in all the years you've lived here, you've never once asked for help. Never complained, never caused trouble. But I'm getting the feeling there's trouble coming whether we want it or not. Ryan met his gaze. You're not wrong. Then maybe it's time you let me know what we're facing, Harker said. I'm not just some backwater sheriff, Caldwell. 20 years with Phoenix PD before I moved out here. Worked narcotics for 12 of those years. Ryan considered his options. Having the sheriff's informed cooperation could be valuable, especially if federal agencies were already involved but withholding support. He lowered his voice. Carlos Escobar is establishing a new trafficking corridor through our valley. Harker's expression remained composed, but Ryan noted the slight widening of his eyes, the only indication of his surprise. That's cartel royalty. Why here? Why now? Increased enforcement along traditional routes. Our valley offers natural concealment, minimal population, and easy access to Interstate 10. Ryan paused. The advance team has already conducted reconnaissance. They're approaching landowners with purchase offers. Damn, Harker muttered. I've got 8 deputies covering 1,200 square miles. If Escobar decides to move in force, it won't be your responsibility, Ryan assured him. When it happens, federal task forces will respond. Your job is to keep civilians clear and maintain plausible deniability. Harker's eyes narrowed. And what exactly will you be doing, Caldwell? Ryan finished his coffee and stood. What I was trained to do. The drive back to his ranch took Ryan past the western approach to the valley, a narrow canyon that served as one of only 3 viable vehicle access points. He pulled over at a concealed location and scanned the area with binoculars. Fresh tire tracks indicated recent activity, and a discarded water bottle with Spanish labeling confirmed his suspicions. Escobar's men were mapping all possible routes. Back at his property, Ryan found a business card identical to the one Margaret had shown him tucked into his gate. The implied message was clear. They knew where he lived, they knew he was alone, and they were prepared to make him an offer before resorting to threats. Ryan took the card and continued to his house. Inside, he activated his satellite communications system and made contact with a former teammate now working with a private intelligence firm. Mason, it's Caldwell. I need everything you have on Sonoran agricultural enterprises. Specifically, connections to Carlos Escobar. Caldwell? Jesus, it's been what, 3 years? Let me guess, trouble found you again. Mason's voice carried the familiar gallows humor of their unit. Something like that. Give me 12 hours. I'll see what I can dig up. Mason paused. You alone out there? For now. Need backup. Ryan considered the offer. Mason was reliable. They'd served together for 6 years and saved each other's lives more times than either cared to count. But bringing in outside help would escalate the situation and potentially endanger more people. Not yet. Just information. Roger that. Watch your 6. After ending the call, Ryan turned his attention to his surveillance systems. He noticed that one of his remote cameras near the southern property line had stopped transmitting. It could be equipment failure, but his instincts told him otherwise. He grabbed his rifle, a sidearm, and additional surveillance equipment before heading out to investigate. As he approached the location, Ryan moved with the practiced stealth of a man who had spent years mastering the art of invisible movement. Echo ranged ahead, her training allowing her to search for human presence without giving away their position. The disabled camera had been carefully removed from its concealed location in a juniper tree. The work was professional, no obvious damage, just a clean extraction. Nearby, Ryan found boot prints matching the tactical footwear he'd observed on Escobar's men earlier. More concerning was what he found 50 yards away, a sophisticated signal detector partially hidden under a rock overhang. The device was actively scanning for electronic emissions, targeting the frequencies used by his security system. Ryan left it undisturbed. Disabling it would alert Escobar's team that their equipment had been discovered. Instead, he established a new observation post on higher ground, using passive surveillance methods that wouldn't emit detectable signals. From this vantage point, he had clear sight lines to the southern approach and could monitor activity without revealing his position. As dusk settled over the valley, Ryan observed three men in camouflage clothing moving methodically through the terrain below. Their movement patterns were disciplined and efficient, clearing sectors, maintaining spacing, using hand signals rather than radio communication. Former military, without question. They were methodically exploring the southern section of the valley, documenting terrain features and lines of sight. Standard pre-operation reconnaissance. Ryan remained motionless, allowing them to work. Knowledge flowed in both directions. While they were learning about his valley, he was learning about their methods, their equipment, and their level of training. After 2 hours, the reconnaissance team withdrew to the south. Ryan waited another hour before returning to his ranch house, moving via an indirect route to avoid potential observation posts. Inside, he found a voicemail from Sheriff Harker. "Caldwell, we had reports of 3 black SUVs heading toward your area about an hour ago. Thought you should know. Be careful out there." Ryan checked his security monitors. Nothing yet, but the warning aligned with the reconnaissance activity he'd observed. Escobar was accelerating his timeline. Just after midnight, Ryan's satellite phone buzzed with a text from Mason. Company registration traces to Shell Corporation in Panama. Principal stakeholder is Maria Vasquez, Escobar's sister-in-law. Used in 3 previous territory expansions. Pattern is consistent. Offer money, then threaten, then eliminate resistance. Full file incoming. The attached documents confirmed Ryan's assessment. Sonoran Agricultural Enterprises was a laundering operation used to acquire properties along intended trafficking routes. In previous operations, landowners who refused to sell had faced escalating intimidation, property destruction, livestock killings, and ultimately direct violence. Most concerning was the tactical precision described in the intelligence reports. Escobar's security forces operated with military discipline, using coordinated small-unit tactics and specialized equipment. Their operations typically began with electronic countermeasures to disable communications and security systems, followed by swift, overwhelming force. Ryan studied the reports with clinical detachment. The patterns were familiar, similar to insurgent operations he'd encountered overseas. Each previous incursion had succeeded because the targets were unprepared civilians facing professional combatants. That asymmetry wouldn't exist here. At 0200 hours, a perimeter alarm activated. Ryan checked the security monitor and saw 3 vehicles approaching slowly along the main road, headlights off, using only ambient moonlight for navigation. He counted 8 thermal signatures. Armed men moving in a tactical formation toward his property line. Ryan sent a brief text to Jackson and Sheriff Harker. Contact imminent. Maintain distance. Then he moved to his prepared position near the barn, where he had clear lines of fire to the approaching vehicles without being silhouetted against the house. Echo took her position beside him, her training keeping her silent and still despite the tension in the air. Ryan settled his breathing and watched through his thermal scope as the intruders approached his gate. The pattern matched the intelligence exactly. 2 men moved forward to disable the gate lock, while others established a perimeter. Their movements were coordinated and professional. These weren't typical cartel enforcers. They were trained operators executing a rehearsed plan. Ryan remained motionless, observing. This wasn't an assassination team. If it were, they would have approached differently, with snipers establishing overwatch positions before the main force advanced. This was a show of force, intended to intimidate. The lead vehicle stopped 30 yards from the house. A man stepped out, tall, confident, moving with the measured precision of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Even without the scope, Ryan would have recognized Carlos Escobar. The cartel lieutenant surveyed the darkened house, then spoke into a radio. Immediately, the remaining vehicles illuminated the property with high-powered spotlights. A voice called out in accented English. "Mr. Caldwell, we know you are home. We only wish to talk business. Please come out so we can discuss a proposition that will benefit us both." Ryan made no response. Echo remained perfectly still beside him. her training overriding her instinct to react to the intruders. After a full minute of silence, Escobar spoke again. Your neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, has wisely accepted our offer. The valley will be developed. Your cooperation would be appreciated, but it is not required. The statement was a calculated lie. Margaret hadn't sold her property. Escobar was testing Ryan's connections and information sources. When no response came, Escobar signaled to his men. Two of them approached the house cautiously, weapons ready. Ryan watched through his scope as they peered through windows and tested doors, maintaining professional discipline despite finding no signs of occupancy. He's not here, one reported back in Spanish, unaware that Ryan understood every word. Escobar considered this information, then made a decision. Leave the package. We'll return tomorrow. One of the men placed a manila envelope on the porch, weighted down with a rock. The team then withdrew in the same disciplined manner they had arrived, maintaining tactical spacing and security as they returned to their vehicles. Ryan remained in position until the vehicles had disappeared from sight, and his perimeter sensors confirmed they had left the valley entirely. Only then did he move to the porch to retrieve the envelope. Inside was a formal offer to purchase his property for 3 times its market value, along with documents prepared for his signature. Clipped to these was a photograph that gave him pause, a long-range shot of him standing on his porch, clearly taken with a high-powered lens from considerable distance. The message was unmistakable. We can reach you whenever we choose. Ryan returned to his workshop and activated his secure communication system. Jackson, we've had first contact. Formal offer made, backed by implied threat. Escobar personally present. Understood, came the terse reply. Task force is monitoring. Hold position. Ryan knew what that meant. The federal agencies were aware of Escobar's movement into the area but were waiting, hoping to catch more significant players or gather intelligence on the broader operation. He was expected to be the bait. Roger that, he responded, keeping his tone neutral. Dawn was breaking as Ryan completed his preparations. He'd established fallback positions throughout his property, cached weapons and supplies at strategic locations, and activated his full array of early warning systems. Echo remained at his side, sensing the coming confrontation. Standing on his porch, Ryan watched the sun rise over the eastern ridge. The valley stretched before him, peaceful in the morning light. This land had become more than property to him. It was the home he'd never had during his years of deployment, the place where his fractured soul had begun to heal. He would defend it, not just for himself, but for what it represented. A line drawn against the chaos and violence he'd spent his life fighting. A stand made on American soil against those who would bring war to peaceful communities. Escobar had made his opening move. Now it was Ryan's turn. The manila envelope sat on Ryan's kitchen table, its contents spread before him. The purchase offer, the prepared documents, and most tellingly, the surveillance photo. He studied each item methodically, looking for information beyond the obvious intimidation tactic. The letterhead of Sonoran Agricultural Enterprises contained a logo, a stylized sun rising over mountains. Ryan recognized it as matching a tattoo he'd seen on one of Escobar's men. Not just a corporate front then, but a symbol of the organization itself. The phone number listed had a Tucson area code. The signature belonged to Eduardo Vasquez, likely another family connection. Ryan took cell phone pictures of everything, then gathered the documents and placed them back in the envelope. He wouldn't respond yet. In his experience, silence often revealed more than engagement, forcing the other side to show their next move. The sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. Ryan moved to the security monitors and identified Sheriff Harker's patrol truck coming up the main road. He holstered his sidearm beneath his untucked shirt and went outside to meet him. Harker looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night. "Got your message," he said, stepping out of his vehicle. "Figured I should check in personally." Ryan nodded. "Coffee?" Inside, Harker studied the purchase offer while Ryan poured them each a cup. 3 times market value. the sheriff observed. They're serious. They are, Ryan confirmed. But it's not about the land. It's about the route. Harker rubbed his face. I made some calls last night after your text. Border Patrol, DEA, even an old contact at FBI. Nobody's willing to commit resources yet. They're all monitoring the situation. His frustration was evident. Translation, they're waiting for blood before they'll move. Standard procedure, Ryan said without judgment. Agencies have limited resources. They prioritize active threats over potential ones. That's bureaucrat thinking, Harker snapped. Anyone with sense can see what's coming. Ryan sipped his coffee, his expression giving away nothing. What's the word in town? People are nervous. Margaret told some folks about the offer she got. Doris at the general store said 2 more ranchers got similar visits yesterday. Peterson's place down by the Southern Canyon and the Miller property east of the highway. This confirmed Ryan's assessment. Escobar was attempting to secure multiple access points to the valley, creating a corridor wide enough for significant trafficking operations. Any acceptances? Ryan asked. Not that I've heard. These are stubborn people, Caldwell. Multi-generation ranchers don't sell easily, especially when they sense something's off. That resilience will put them in danger, Ryan said quietly. Escobar doesn't take rejection well. Harker studied him. You know a lot about cartel operations for a retired Army guy. Ryan met his gaze evenly. My last 3 years of service were with Joint Special Operations Command. We targeted high-value individuals in cartel and terrorist organizations. I was the primary designated marksman for operations in northern Mexico and the border region. Understanding dawned in Harker's eyes. That's why you chose this valley. You knew what was coming eventually. I recognized its tactical significance, Ryan acknowledged. And I preferred having that vulnerability in the hands of someone who understood what it meant. Harker absorbed this information, then asked directly, "What's your plan?" Depends on Escobar's next move. If he follows established patterns, the offers will be followed by threats, then demonstrations of force. Small-scale violence to prove their resolve, property damage, livestock killings. And after that, direct action against those who continue to resist. Harker's expression hardened. I can't let civilians get caught in a cartel war, Caldwell. I agree, Ryan said calmly. Which is why I'm telling you to be ready to evacuate the Thornton Ranch and any other properties within 5 miles of the valley when things escalate. Get those people out and let the agencies handle the response. While you do what exactly? Ryan didn't answer directly. I've notified certain contacts. When Escobar makes his move, there will be evidence. The appropriate task forces will respond. Harker didn't look convinced, but seemed to recognize the limits of what Ryan was willing to share. I'll start making contingency plans. But Caldwell, don't play hero out here. You call me before you do anything that might get yourself killed. I've never been the hero type, Sheriff. Just practical. After Harker left, Ryan moved to his workshop and began preparing specialized equipment. He'd spent years developing contingency plans for exactly this scenario, not out of paranoia, but from the professional understanding that high-value territory eventually attracts attention. From a locked cabinet, he retrieved a set of custom-built surveillance devices, solar-powered, with minimal electronic signatures that would evade standard detection equipment. Each was disguised as a natural feature: rocks, tree branches, even bird nests. He'd deploy these along likely approach routes to replace the systems Escobar's men had already identified. His satellite phone buzzed with a message from Jackson. Task force mobilizing in Tucson. 72-hour standby. Maintain surveillance only. Ryan understood the subtext. Federal authorities were assembling resources but wouldn't commit them until clear evidence of criminal activity emerged. They needed Escobar to make a demonstrable move before they could justify intervention. That afternoon, Ryan saddled Sergeant and rode the perimeter of his property, Echo trotting alongside. He placed the new surveillance devices at strategic locations, focusing on areas with good sight lines to potential approach routes. Each device transmitted to a secure server rather than directly to his property, eliminating the electronic trail that had compromised his earlier systems. As he worked, Ryan's mind drifted to similar operations in Afghanistan, establishing observation posts in hostile territory, creating networks of local informants, mapping patterns of enemy movement. The tactics were the same, only the terrain had changed. On the western ridge, Ryan paused to survey the valley. Through his binoculars, he spotted dust clouds rising from the direction of the Thornton Ranch. He adjusted his focus and identified 3 vehicles moving along Margaret's northern fence line. Even at this distance, he recognized the distinctive black SUVs of Escobar's security team. Ryan changed direction, cutting across a dry wash that would bring him closer to Margaret's property while keeping him concealed behind the ridge line. 20 minutes later, he secured Sargent in a stand of juniper trees and continued on foot to an observation point overlooking the Thornton Ranch. Through his spotting scope, he observed 5 men in tactical gear surveying the property. They moved with professional discipline, documenting fence lines, access roads, and structures. 2 carried what appeared to be high-end survey equipment, but Ryan recognized it as cover for mapping defensive positions and lines of sight. Margaret emerged from her house, shotgun visible in her hands. Even from this distance, Ryan could read the tension in her posture as she confronted the intruders. The lead figure, a tall man Ryan hadn't observed before, held up his hands in a placating gesture, then retrieved documents from his vehicle. The conversation appeared tense but remained nonviolent. After several minutes, Margaret returned to her house, and the men continued their survey of the property. Their movements became more purposeful after her departure, suggesting they were now conducting the real assessment they'd come for. Ryan documented everything with a small camera equipped with a telephoto lens. When the team finally departed, he tracked their movement through the valley. Instead of heading back toward the southern pass, they turned east toward Highway 82, suggesting they had additional properties to visit. By the time Ryan returned to his ranch, dusk was settling over the valley. He downloaded the surveillance photos to his secure server and sent selected images to his contacts with federal agencies, providing evidence of Escobar's expanding operations. That evening, Margaret called. They came back, she said without preamble. Different approach this time. Said they had environmental concerns about water rights in the valley. Claimed they were doing an impact study for potential development. What did they actually do? Ryan asked. Took soil samples, measured distances, marked GPS coordinates. But 2 of them kept wandering off to check sight lines from my property to yours. When I called them on it, they claimed they were assessing watershed patterns. Her voice carried a mixture of anger and concern. One of them took particular interest in my barn and equipment shed. Kept asking about storage capacity and access. Ryan understood immediately. Escobar was identifying potential locations for way stations, secure facilities where shipments could be temporarily stored during transit. Margaret's barn, with its remote location and substantial size, would be ideal. Did they make another offer? Not directly, but their leader, guy named Vasquez, mentioned that property values in the area are likely to become volatile and suggested I should consider options while the market is favorable. Classic cartel approach, Ryan observed. Veiled threats disguised as business advice. Margaret's voice hardened. I've survived 40 years in this country, Caldwell. Drought, flood, wildfire, and my herald's passing. I'm not selling out to drug runners. I understand your resolve, Margaret. But these people play by different rules. When the offers stop, physical threats will start. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to prepare you, Ryan said. I need you to pack an emergency bag. Keep it ready. When I tell you to leave, you need to go immediately. No questions, no delays. The line went silent for a moment. You're expecting violence. I'm expecting Escobar to follow established patterns. First comes money, then comes intimidation. After that comes force. Ryan paused. I've made arrangements. When it happens, federal task forces will respond. But there will be a window of vulnerability between Escobar's move and official intervention. And during that window? During that window, I'll do what I was trained to do. After ending the call, Ryan checked his security feeds. All clear for now, but his instincts told him the situation would escalate soon. Escobar had completed his reconnaissance and made initial approaches to key property owners. The next phase would demonstrate the consequences of resistance. Ryan moved methodically through his preparations. He checked weapons, communications equipment, and medical supplies. He prepared fallback positions and escape routes. Each action was performed with the calm precision that had kept him alive through dozens of high-risk operations. Just after midnight, his satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from Jackson. Fire reported at Peterson Ranch. Multiple armed suspects. Local fire department responding. Ryan immediately checked his surveillance system and located a thermal signature of a large fire approximately 4 miles southwest of his position, the Peterson property near the Southern Canyon entrance to the valley. He sent a brief acknowledgement to Jackson, then changed into tactical gear. Echo, guard, he commanded, pointing to the house. The Belgian Malinois immediately took up her protective position. Ryan had trained her to defend the property in his absence, one of many contingency plans now being activated. He took his truck, driving without headlights along the familiar ranch roads until he reached an observation point overlooking the southern approach. From there, the Peterson fire was clearly visible, a massive blaze consuming what appeared to be a barn or large outbuilding. Flashlights and vehicle headlights moved around the property as emergency responders attempted to contain the flames. Through his night vision binoculars, Ryan spotted what the responders likely hadn't. 3 vehicles parked on a service road approximately half a mile from the Peterson place. Even at this distance, he recognized the distinctive profile of Escobar's black SUVs. Ryan's mind flashed back to the mountains of Afghanistan's Karangal Valley. His unit had observed similar tactics from insurgent groups, attacking a target, then remaining nearby to document the response and gather intelligence on security procedures. It was a professional approach designed to evaluate reaction times and response capabilities before committing to larger operations. He considered his options. Engaging Escobar's men directly would escalate the situation prematurely. Alerting local authorities to their presence would reveal his own surveillance capabilities. After careful consideration, Ryan chose a third option, detailed documentation for federal agencies that would help build the case for intervention. He photographed the vehicles and their occupants using a specialized night vision camera that captured identifying details even in low light conditions. He noted timestamps, positions, and movement patterns. This evidence, combined with the fire itself, would demonstrate the escalation pattern typical of cartel territorial expansion. After 2 hours, when the fire had been largely contained and emergency responders were beginning to withdraw, Escobar's vehicles departed via the Southern Canyon Road. Ryan followed at a safe distance, tracking them to the staging area he'd previously identified in the Box Canyon. There, for additional vehicles waited. Men transferred equipment and exchanged information before all vehicles departed south toward the border. Ryan returned to his ranch as dawn was breaking, the smell of smoke from the Peterson fire still hanging in the air. He transferred the surveillance data to his secure server and forwarded key information to his federal contacts, including Jackson and the DEA task force. Jackson's response came quickly. Evidence received. Task force alert level elevated. Maintain surveillance, avoid engagement. Ryan understood the clinical language. The agencies were building their case, documenting the pattern of escalation that would justify a major operation. In the meantime, the local community remained vulnerable. He was checking his perimeter when Sheriff Harker's truck approached. The sheriff looked grim as he stepped out, his uniform smelling of smoke and his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Peterson's barn is gone. All his equipment, feed stores, everything. Fire department says it was definitely arson. Accelerants used, ignition points strategically placed to ensure complete destruction. Casualties? Ryan asked. None, thankfully. But it was close. The fire was set to spread toward the house. If Peterson's son hadn't been up late and spotted it early. Parker left the implication hanging. Message delivery, Ryan observed. Demonstrating capability and resolve without crossing the line to homicide, which would trigger immediate federal response. Parker studied him. You predicted this. It follows the pattern. First offers, then property destruction. Next will be physical threats or attacks on livestock, escalating pressure without creating martyrs. Peterson's already talking about selling. Can't blame him. He's got young kids, and the message was pretty damn clear. Parker looked out over the valley. Miller got a call this morning, too. Same offer he rejected last week, but now with an urgency premium if he accepts within 48 hours. Ryan nodded, unsurprised. Escobar is accelerating his timeline, creating examples while offering others a face-saving way to cooperate. What about you? Get any new offers? Not yet, Ryan said. But they'll come. And your answer will be the same, Parker observed. It wasn't a question. Ryan met his gaze steadily. Some lines have to be held, Sheriff. Some places need defending. Even at the cost of your life? I made the calculation a long time ago, Ryan replied calmly. In mountains and deserts far from here. The stakes haven't changed, just the battlefield. Parker seemed about to say more when his radio crackled. He listened to the transmission, his expression darkening. Reports of armed men at the Thornton Ranch. Shots fired. I've got to go. I'm coming with you, Ryan said, already moving toward his truck. This is police business, Caldwell. Margaret is my friend and neighbor. And you know you're outgunned if it's Escobar's crew. Ryan retrieved his rifle from his vehicle. You need the backup, whether you'll admit it or not. Parker hesitated, then nodded grimly. Follow my lead. No cowboy shit. They took separate vehicles, racing along the valley roads toward the Thornton Ranch. Ryan's mind was already calculating tactical scenarios, assessing potential threats and response options. The pattern was accelerating faster than expected, moving from property destruction to direct confrontation in less than 12 hours. As they approached Margaret's property, Ryan noted 3 black SUVs parked in the circular driveway. 6 men in tactical gear stood in the yard, weapons visible but not currently aimed. Margaret was on her porch, shotgun in hand, clearly in a standoff situation. Parker pulled in first, emergency lights flashing. Ryan parked behind him but remained in his vehicle, assessing the situation before committing. Through his windshield, he recognized one of the armed men as Carlos Escobar himself, an unusual direct involvement that signaled the importance of this operation. The sheriff stepped out, hand deliberately away from his sidearm but posture alert. What's going on here, folks? One of the men, tall, with the bearing of a commander, stepped forward. Police presence is unnecessary. We are having a business discussion with Mrs. Thornton. Business discussions don't usually involve firearms, Parker observed, nodding toward the visible weapons. Security precautions only. This is dangerous country. The man smiled without warmth. I am Eduardo Vasquez, representing Sonoran Agricultural Enterprises. We have a legitimate interest in Mrs. Thornton's property, and I've told them for the 3rd time that my ranch isn't for sale. Margaret called from the porch, her shotgun still leveled at the intruders. Then they started shooting my cattle. Ryan scanned the pasture beyond the house and spotted the evidence. 3 dead steers visible from his position, precision shots to the head from what appeared to be a professional marksman. Parker's posture shifted subtly, his hand moving closer to his weapon. That's destruction of property and animal cruelty at minimum. I'm going to need all of you to put your weapons down and present identification. Vasquez laughed. I don't think you understand the situation, Sheriff. We outnumber and outgun you. This is merely a demonstration for Mrs. Thornton of the declining security situation in this valley. Property values are falling by the minute. Ryan recognized the moment was approaching a flashpoint. Parker was outnumbered, and Margaret was in immediate danger. He needed to change the dynamic before violence erupted. With deliberate calm, Ryan stepped out of his truck, rifle held casually but visibly at low ready. He moved to a position that gave him clear firing lanes to multiple targets while using his vehicle for partial cover. "Mr. Vasquez," he called out, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in combat zones around the world. "Your demonstration is concluded. I suggest you and your men withdraw while that option remains available." Vasquez turned, assessing Ryan with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to violence. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell, we were planning to visit you next." His smile remained, but his eyes hardened. "Perhaps you should consider your own situation before interfering in others' business affairs." Ryan didn't respond to the threat. Instead, he made a small show of checking his rifle's optics, then returned his gaze to Vasquez. "Sheriff Harker is giving you a lawful order to disarm. I suggest you comply." The standoff crystallized, tension thickening the air. Ryan was acutely aware of each man's position, their firing stances, the distribution of weapons. He noted Carlos Escobar standing slightly apart, watching the confrontation with clinical interest rather than direct involvement, assessing Ryan's capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability. In the frigid silence, Ryan's mind flashed back to a similar standoff in a mountain village in Afghanistan. The terrain was different, but the underlying dynamics were identical. Intimidation met with resistance, power calculations being made by all parties, the razor's edge between violence and withdrawal. Vasquez broke the silence. "Perhaps we have made our point for today." He nodded to his men, who began backing toward their vehicles with practiced discipline, weapons still visible but pointed downward. "Consider our offer, Mrs. Thornton. The terms become less favorable with each refusal." "Get off my property," Margaret replied, her voice steady despite the tension. The men entered their vehicles with the coordinated movements of a trained unit. As they prepared to depart, Vasquez looked directly at Ryan. "We'll continue our discussion soon, Mr. Caldwell. I believe you'll find our terms compelling." Only when the vehicles had disappeared down the road did Ryan lower his rifle. He moved immediately to check on Margaret, who finally allowed the shotgun barrel to drop. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her for any signs of injury. "No," she said, her voice steady but hands trembling slightly. "They shot my cattle to make a point. Said it would be my horses next, then my dogs, and eventually me." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Told me the sheriff couldn't protect me, and neither could my military friend." Harker joined them on the porch, radio in hand as he called in details of the incident. "We need to get you somewhere safe, Margaret," he said after completing the call. "This is escalating too quickly." "I'm not leaving my ranch," she insisted. "Just temporarily," Ryan said gently, "until federal agencies can respond. This is following a pattern we've seen before. The next visit won't end with a warning." Margaret looked between the two men, then out at her dead cattle in the field. Something in her expression shifted, the recognition of a threat beyond her capacity to resist alone. "How long?" she asked. "Pack for at least a week," Ryan advised. "Take important documents and anything irreplaceable." While Margaret went inside to prepare, Ryan and Harker conferred on the porch. "This is moving faster than I expected," Ryan admitted. "Escobar is personally involved, which means this corridor is a major priority." "I've got calls into every agency with jurisdiction," Harker said. "But they're all saying the same thing, gathering evidence, preparing resources, assessing jurisdiction." "Bureaucratic delay," Ryan observed. "Meanwhile, civilians are at risk. I can evacuate the immediate area, but my authority stops at the county line." Harker rubbed his face tiredly. "And I've got 3 deputies available today for the entire region." Ryan nodded. "Decision made. Get Margaret and the others to safety. I'll handle security in the valley until the federal response arrives." "That's not your job, Caldwell." "With respect, Sheriff, it's exactly what I was trained for." Harker studied him for a long moment. "You're talking about taking on a cartel security force single-handed." "I'm talking about defending American soil against hostile intrusion," Ryan corrected. "Something I've done my entire adult life." Before Harker could respond, Ryan's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message from Jackson. Confirmed Escobar presence. Task Force authorization expedited. ETA 4,872 hours for full deployment. Ryan showed the message to Harker. 2 to 3 days. That's our window. A lot can happen in that time. Yes, Ryan agreed. It can. When Margaret emerged with her bags, Ryan helped load them into Harker's vehicle. The sheriff will take you somewhere safe, he assured her. When this is over, I'll personally help you rebuild whatever needs rebuilding. Margaret gripped his arm. You be careful, Ryan Caldwell. This valley needs people like you. After they departed, Ryan surveyed the property one last time before returning to his own ranch. The encounter had confirmed what he already suspected. Escobar was personally directing this operation, using professional security personnel with military-grade training and equipment. The next confrontation wouldn't end in withdrawal. It would be a direct test of capabilities and resolve. Ryan needed to prepare accordingly. Back at his ranch, he found a new manila envelope attached to his front door, delivery method unknown, which itself was concerning. Inside was a modified purchase offer for his property, now at 5 times market value, along with a USB drive. Ryan took the drive to his workshop and connected it to a standalone computer with no network access, standard security protocol for potentially compromised media. The drive contained a single video file. The footage showed his ranch house from multiple angles, clearly taken over several days. There were shots of him working around the property, walking with Echo, even cleaning his weapons inside his workshop. Evidence of sophisticated surveillance that had eluded his security systems. The final segment showed a black SUV parked on a ridge overlooking his house. A man exited the vehicle carrying what appeared to be a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. He set up a firing position, calibrated his scope, and acquired a sight picture of Ryan's front door. The message was unmistakable. You are within range at all times. Ryan studied the footage without visible reaction, his mind cataloging details, angles, distances, equipment. The surveillance was professional grade, indicating resources beyond typical cartel operations. The implicit threat was equally professional, demonstrating capability without crossing the line to actual violence that would trigger immediate federal response. The final frame displayed text in both Spanish and English. Final offer expires at midnight. After that, we take what we want. Ryan checked the timestamp on the envelope. The deadline was less than 6 hours away. He moved to his communications system and sent detailed updates to his federal contacts, including the new threat and deadline. Jackson's response was immediate but unchanged. Task Force mobilizing. Maintain position. Avoid direct engagement, if possible. Ryan understood the subtext. Help was coming, but not soon enough to prevent the initial assault. He would be on his own when Escobar made his move. As the sun began to set over the western ridge, casting long shadows across Caldwell Valley, Ryan completed his final preparations. He secured Echo in a reinforced safe room he built specifically for this purpose, stocked with food, water, and comfort items. The loyal dog seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, whining softly as Ryan knelt to stroke her head. It's all right, girl, he said quietly. You've done your part. Now it's my turn. Ryan changed into his combat loadout, lightweight body armor beneath a tactical vest holding ammunition, communications equipment, and medical supplies. He selected his primary weapons with care, the custom Remington 700 for precision work, an M4 carbine with suppressor for closer engagements, and his trusted sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 that had accompanied him through multiple combat deployments. As darkness fell completely, Ryan moved to his primary observation post on the eastern ridge. From this position, he had clear sight lines to all likely approach routes while remaining effectively invisible against the rocky terrain. His night vision equipment transformed the darkness into shades of green, revealing the valley in crisp detail. The memories came unbidden, nights spent on remote mountainsides in Afghanistan, watching Taliban fighters move through valleys much like this one. The weight of his rifle, the rhythm of his breathing, the hyper-awareness of every sound and movement. Some experiences became muscle memory, never truly forgotten regardless of the years that passed. Ryan settled into the patient stillness that had defined his military career. The waiting was always the hardest part for most operators, but for him, it had always been a strength. The ability to remain motionless for hours, mind alert but body relaxed, was what had made him an exceptional sniper. As the midnight deadline approached, Ryan detected the first signs of movement, vehicles approaching from the south with headlights off, using only moonlight for navigation. Through his night vision, he counted 6 SUVs moving in tactical formation. Based on typical cartel security protocols, that suggested approximately 20 to 24 operators. The odds were significant, but not insurmountable. Ryan had faced worse in urban combat situations with less favorable terrain. Here, he had the advantage of intimate knowledge of every ridge, gully, and approach route. He had prepared fallback positions, pre-sighted firing lanes, and carefully planned defensive measures. As Escobar's forces approached his property line, Ryan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Jackson, task force deploying. Hold position 2,436 hours. Surveillance drones en route. Ryan acknowledged the message, then turned his full attention to the approaching threat. The cartel deadline had expired. The defense of Caldwell Valley was about to begin. Ryan watched through his night vision as Escobar's convoy approached his property. Their movement was disciplined and methodical, vehicles maintaining tactical spacing, stopping at predetermined intervals to allow foot teams to move forward and secure the route. These weren't street thugs. They were trained operators executing a rehearsed plan. The lead elements paused at his property line, conducting what appeared to be electronic countermeasures, scanning for surveillance devices and security systems. Ryan smiled grimly. His new passive systems would be virtually undetectable by standard equipment. Through his spotting scope, he identified Carlos Escobar in the second vehicle, directing operations but remaining safely back from the initial advance. Eduardo Vasquez led the forward element, deploying his men with hand signals and minimal radio communication, standard procedure to avoid detection. Ryan keyed his satellite phone, sending a brief text to Jackson. Contact initiated. Approximately 24 hostiles, military-grade equipment and tactics. Escobar on site personally directing. The response came seconds later. Acknowledged. Surveillance drone 30 minutes out. QRF mobilizing from Tucson. Maintain defensive posture. Ryan knew what that meant. The quick reaction force was preparing, but wouldn't deploy until there was actionable intelligence from the drone or confirmed reports of violence. He would be on his own for at least the next hour, possibly longer. The cartel forces began a systematic approach to his ranch house. 2 foreman teams circled wide to establish positions covering the front and rear of the structure, while a technical team moved directly toward his main gate. Their movements displayed the precision of professional soldiers, covering angles, maintaining spacing, advancing in coordinated rushes while others provided overwatch. Ryan remained motionless, controlling his breathing as he had been trained. He could engage now, disrupting their advance with precision fire from his concealed position. But doing so would reveal his location and trigger an immediate escalation. Better to let them commit fully to their plan, revealing capabilities and intentions before he responded. The technical team breached his gate using bolt cutters on the chain, then proceeded cautiously up the driveway. 2 men approached the front door while others established a perimeter. Ryan noted their equipment: plate carriers, air platform rifles with suppressors, tactical communications gear, and night vision. One carried what appeared to be a battering ram for forced entry. After a brief radio exchange, Vasquez moved forward from the second vehicle. He approached the front door, knocked formally, then waited. When no response came, he nodded to his men. The battering ram made short work of the door, and the entry team flowed inside with practiced efficiency. Ryan watched the methodical search of his house through the thermal signatures visible from his position. The team moved room to room, clearing each space according to professional protocols. Their frustration became evident when they discovered the house was empty. No occupant, no dog, not even indications of recent presence. Vasquez emerged from the house, speaking urgently into his radio. Immediately, the security posture of the entire force shifted. Men who had been focused on the house now expanded their search perimeter, scanning the surrounding terrain with increased urgency. Through his scope, Ryan could see Escobar exit his vehicle, gesturing angrily as he conferred with Vasquez. The cartel lieutenant had expected Ryan to be at home, possibly asleep, an easy target for intimidation or elimination. The empty house had disrupted their operational plan. Ryan's satellite phone vibrated again. Jackson's message was terse. Drone feed established. Task Force commanders monitoring. Authorization for defensive action granted. That was the green light Ryan had been waiting for. Federal authorities were now witnesses to the armed invasion of his property, providing legal justification for his response. More importantly, they would have video evidence of everything that followed. Ryan took a final moment to center himself, slowing his breathing and clearing his mind as he had before countless operations. Then, with deliberate precision, he shouldered his rifle and acquired his first target. A cartel operator who had established an overwatch position on Ryan's barn roof, commanding excellent fields of fire across the property. The distance was 437 yards, a challenging shot in daylight, considerably more difficult under night vision. Ryan calculated windage, elevation, and temperature adjustments almost unconsciously, his body remembering what his mind had practiced thousands of times. He exhaled slowly, then squeezed the trigger during the natural respiratory pause. The suppressed rifle made a muted thump, barely audible beyond a few dozen yards. Through his scope, Ryan watched the impact, center mass, dropping the target instantly. Before the cartel forces could react to their comrades' fall, Ryan had already shifted to his second target, another overwatch position at the corner of his workshop. The shot was clean, the operator collapsing without a sound. For 15 crucial seconds, the cartel force remained unaware they were under attack. Ryan used this window to eliminate 2 more sentries, creating gaps in their security perimeter. Only when the 4th man fell did alarm spread through their ranks. Vasquez immediately recognized the threat pattern and began shouting orders. Men scrambled for cover, some returning fire blindly toward the ridge where Ryan's muzzle flash, though suppressed, had provided a general indication of his position. Ryan was already moving, employing the shouldn't-move tactics that had kept him alive through dozens of combat engagements. He fired twice more from his secondary position, then displaced again before counterfire could find him. His mind flashed back to a night operation in Kandahar province, similar terrain, similar tactical problem. His unit had been outnumbered 3-2 by Taliban fighters occupying a village. The solution then was the same as now: create confusion, disrupt command and control, force the enemy to divide their attention. The cartel forces began to spread out, some moving toward the ridge where they believed the sniper was hiding, others maintaining security around Escobar's vehicle. Their disciplined response confirmed Ryan's assessment. These were professionals, likely with military or special forces backgrounds. Ryan keyed his comm device, activating the first of several pre-position measures he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. For 100 yards south of his position, a series of solar-powered lights suddenly illuminated, creating the impression of movement along the ridge line. Predictably, several cartel operators immediately directed fire toward this new potential threat. In the moment of distraction, Ryan changed positions again, moving laterally along the ridge to a prepared hide with clear fields of fire to the central area where Escobar and Vasquez had established their command position. The range was longer now, 612 yards, but still well within his capabilities. Ryan acquired Vasquez in his scope. Taking out the tactical commander would significantly degrade the cartel force's effectiveness. He controlled his breathing, made final adjustments, and prepared to fire. A sudden gust of wind from the west caused him to pause. Years of experience had taught him to respect the subtle ways nature could affect a bullet's trajectory. He recalculated, adjusting for the wind, then squeezed the trigger. The round caught Vasquez in the upper torso, spinning him to the ground. Immediately, two bodyguards rushed to shield Escobar, hustling him toward the relative safety of an armored SUV. Ryan shifted his aim to the vehicle's tires, placing two precise shots that flattened the front and rear on the driver's side. The SUV wouldn't be going anywhere. The cartel force erupted into chaotic activity, some rushing to secure their wounded commander, others returning suppressive fire toward the ridge, still others attempting to regroup and establish a cohesive response. Their professional discipline was beginning to fragment under the pressure of an unseen, highly effective attacker. Ryan used this confusion to relocate again, moving to his third prepared position on the western flank. From here, he transitioned to his M4 carbine, better suited for the closer engagement range as he worked his way down the ridge. The memories flooded back, a night operation in Helmand province, moving through poppy fields to outflank an entrenched Taliban position. The same controlled breathing, the same awareness of every step and sound, the same perfect unity of mind and body that came only in combat. Ryan triggered his second prepared measure, a series of remote-activated flashbang devices positioned around the perimeter of his property. They detonated in sequence, creating the impression of multiple attackers closing in from different directions. The psychological impact was immediate. Cartel operators began firing in multiple directions, communication breaking down as some called out new threat locations while others maintained focus on the original sniper position. Through his night vision, Ryan observed Escobar shouting into his radio, attempting to restore order. The cartel lieutenant was experienced enough to recognize what was happening. Psychological warfare combined with precision fire, classic special operations tactics designed to magnify the apparent threat. Ryan continued his methodical advance, eliminating two more cartel operators who had become separated from the main force. His movements were ghost-like, flowing from shadow to shadow, using micro-terrain for concealment, leaving no trace of his passage. As he closed within 200 yards of the central area, Ryan observed a significant development. Escobar had managed to restore some order, consolidating his forces around the vehicles. Men were retrieving heavier weapons from the SUVs, what appeared to be light machine guns and possibly a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The tactical situation was evolving. If the cartel force established crew-served weapons positions, they could deliver sustained suppressive fire across the entire property. Ryan needed to disrupt this effort before it materialized. He keyed his comm device again, activating his third prepared measure. A series of remote-controlled propane tanks positioned near his workshop detonated sequentially, creating a spectacular conflagration that illuminated the entire central area of his property. The sudden light destroyed the cartel operator's night vision advantage and created silhouettes of anyone caught in the open. Ryan used this opportunity to deliver precision fire against the heavy weapons team, eliminating 3 operators before they could establish their position. Escobar responded by ordering a tactical retreat toward the southern end of the property. The cartel forces began to move in bounds, some providing covering fire while others fell back to next positions. It was a textbook withdrawal under pressure, further evidence of professional training. Ryan allowed this movement, shifting his own position to maintain observation while conserving ammunition. He counted approximately 15 operators still functional, with perhaps 3 or 4 wounded being assisted during the withdrawal. Vasquez appeared to be seriously injured but still alive, supported between 2 men. His satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Jackson. QRF inbound. ETA 45 minutes. Drone confirms 810 enemy Kia/WI. Maintain defensive posture. Ryan acknowledged the message. 45 minutes was a significant window in a close-quarters engagement. The situation would be resolved, one way or another, before federal forces arrived. The cartel forces established a defensive perimeter approximately 300 yards from Ryan's house, using vehicles and natural terrain for cover. Their withdrawal had been orderly but hurried, suggesting Escobar was reassessing his options rather than abandoning the operation entirely. Ryan used this brief respite to change position again, moving to the eastern approach where he'd established a cache of additional ammunition and supplies. As he replenished his loadout, he observed a new development through his night vision, two vehicles detaching from the main cartel force and circling wide to the east, attempting to flank his position. This was a logical tactical response, but one Ryan had anticipated. He moved quickly to intercept, using a dry creek bed that provided concealed movement parallel to the flanking vehicle's route. He established a hasty ambush position where the vehicles would need to slow for a sharp bend in the rough trail. When the lead SUV came into view, Ryan engaged with disciplined fire, 2 rounds to each of the front tires, followed by precise shots through the windshield that neutralized the driver and front passenger. The vehicle slewed sideways, blocking the narrow trail and forcing the second SUV to brake hard. Ryan immediately shifted fire to this new target, focusing on the engine block and radiator to immobilize the vehicle without causing a catastrophic explosion that might kill all occupants. Federal authorities would want prisoners for intelligence purposes. With both flanking vehicles disabled, Ryan withdrew before the occupants could organize an effective response. He circled back toward his primary observation point, moving with the silent efficiency that had made him a legendary figure in special operations circles. From his elevated position, he observed the main cartel force beginning to falter. Their coordinated efforts were giving way to individual survival responses, some men taking cover wherever they could find it, others preparing for a final defensive stand, a few appearing to argue about the next course of action. Ryan's satellite phone vibrated again. Jackson's message was brief but critical. Weather system moving in from southwest. Expect reduced visibility within 30 minutes. Ryan looked toward the horizon and confirmed the approach of dark clouds, already obscuring the stars in the southern sky. A storm would dramatically change the tactical situation, limiting visibility for both sides, interfering with drone surveillance, and potentially delaying the federal response. He needed to force a resolution before the weather deteriorated. That meant targeting the leadership directly. Through his scope, Ryan located Escobar, who had established a command position behind one of the SUVs, surrounded by his remaining security detail. The cartel lieutenant was still actively directing his forces, using a satellite phone that likely connected him to reinforcements. The shot would be challenging. Approximately 380 yards, with swirling winds ahead of the approaching storm, through gaps in the protective perimeter of guards. Not impossible, but at the upper limits of precision under current conditions. Ryan considered his options. A direct shot at Escobar would eliminate the command element, but might trigger a chaotic, desperate fight to the death among the remaining forces. A more measured approach might yield better results. He decided on a psychological operation. Using his rifle, he delivered a series of precisely placed shots around Escobar's position, close enough to demonstrate his vulnerability, but deliberately non-lethal. One round removed the satellite phone from Escobar's hand. Another struck the ground between his feet. A third shattered the vehicle window inches from his head. The message was clear. You are alive only because I choose not to kill you. Ryan observed the impact through his scope. Escobar's expression shifted from anger to a cold realization. He was at the mercy of an opponent who could have eliminated him at any moment. Then, to Ryan's surprise, Escobar did something unexpected. He stepped away from cover, hands raised, and looked directly toward Ryan's probable position on the ridge. He was offering himself as a target while simultaneously signaling a desire to communicate. It was a calculated risk that demonstrated either supreme confidence or desperate necessity. Either way, it was a significant development that required careful consideration. Ryan maintained his sight picture on Escobar but didn't fire. After a moment's consideration, he triggered his comm device, activating a handheld radio he'd left near the cartel's position during his earlier infiltration. The radio crackled to life with a burst of static. Ryan spoke calmly in fluent Spanish. "Mr. Escobar, your operation has failed. Federal forces are inbound. You've lost at least 10 men, with more wounded. The smart play is withdrawal." There was a pause before Escobar responded, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "You are not law enforcement or military. You are one man defending private property. Perhaps we can still find a business solution." "There is no business to discuss," Ryan replied. "This valley is not for sale. Everything has a price," Escobar countered. "Name yours. Double whatever you're thinking." Ryan allowed a measured silence before responding. "Your mistake is thinking this is about money. It's not. It's about drawing a line. This valley remains American soil, free from cartel influence." The first drops of rain began to fall as Escobar considered this response. The approaching storm front brought gusting winds that rippled through the valley, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. "Your former military," Escobar observed. "Special operations, judging by your skills. You understand strategic reality. Even if you win today, we will return with greater force. The economics demand it." "And your former Mexican special forces," Ryan countered. "Which means you understand what happens when you cross certain lines. The American response may be slow, but it will be overwhelming when it comes. Your operation is now on every federal agency's radar. This corridor is burned." A flash of lightning illuminated the valley, followed by a rolling peal of thunder. The storm was almost upon them, visibility already decreasing as rain began to fall more heavily. "I can offer you safety," Ryan continued. "For you and your wounded. Stay where you are, hands visible, and you'll be taken into custody when federal agents arrive. Standard extradition protocols will apply." Escobar laughed, a short, harsh sound that carried across the radio. "A generous offer from a man who has killed at least 8 of my people tonight. But unnecessary. You've made your point about this valley. Perhaps there are other routes worth exploring instead." Ryan recognized the implicit withdrawal offer. Escobar was cutting his losses, accepting tactical defeat, while preserving his forces for future operations elsewhere. From a purely military perspective, allowing their withdrawal made sense. The cartel forces were contained, federal authorities were inbound, and further bloodshed served no strategic purpose. But Ryan also recognized the likelihood that Escobar would simply redirect his efforts to another vulnerable area, continuing the cycle of violence and corruption. The rain was falling steadily now, reducing visibility and complicating the tactical situation. Ryan made his decision based on years of operational experience. Sometimes the perfect solution isn't available, only the least bad option. "Take your wounded and withdraw," he said finally. "Leave your dead. The federal response is coming regardless, and they'll want evidence of what happened here." "Acceptable terms," Escobar replied. "You've earned professional respect tonight, Senor Caldwell. Not many men could have done what you did." "This isn't about respect," Ryan countered. "It's about consequences. If you or your organization returns to this valley, there won't be any discussion. Remember that." The radio went silent. Through his increasingly rain-obscured optics, Ryan observed the cartel forces organizing their withdrawal. The wounded, including Vasquez, were loaded into the remaining operational vehicles. Dead operators were left where they had fallen, as agreed. Ryan maintained his overwatch position, rifle ready, as the cartel convoy slowly departed via the southern access road. Their headlights cut through the intensifying rain, eventually disappearing beyond the ridge line that marked the valley's southern boundary. Only when the last vehicle had disappeared did Ryan key his satellite phone, sending a brief update to Jackson. "Hostiles withdrawing south. Multiple Kia left on site. Multiple WI evacuated. Escobar alive, departing with main force. The response came quickly, acknowledged. QRF ETA updated to 50 minutes due to weather. Maintain secure position. Well done. Ryan felt the familiar post-combat crash beginning. Adrenaline fading. The hyper-awareness of combat giving way to profound fatigue. He'd been operating at peak performance for hours, making split-second life-or-death decisions, executing complex tactical maneuvers alone against a numerically superior force. He conducted a quick self-assessment. No injuries beyond minor cuts and bruises sustained during his movement through the rugged terrain. His equipment was functional if somewhat depleted. His mind remained clear despite the exhaustion creeping at the edges. The rain had become a downpour, turning the ground beneath him into mud and creating small rivulets that carved channels down the ridge face. Lightning flashed across the sky at regular intervals, briefly illuminating the valley in stark relief before plunging it back into darkness. Ryan secured his rifle and began making his way down the ridge toward his ranch house. The structure was partially visible through the rain, its front door still splintered from the cartel team's forced entry. His workshop continued to burn despite the rain, sending a column of smoke into the turbulent sky. As he approached his property, Ryan conducted a methodical security sweep, verifying that all cartel personnel had indeed withdrawn as agreed. He counted 8 bodies, cartel operators who had fallen to his precision fire during the engagement. Each bore the tactical gear and weapons that confirmed their professional status. These weren't common criminals. They were paramilitary forces operating on American soil. Inside his damaged house, Ryan secured the perimeter as best he could given the destroyed front door. He retrieved Echo from the safe room, the loyal dog whining anxiously until she confirmed her master was unharmed. After giving her a reassuring pat, Ryan established a defensive position covering the most likely approach routes, just in case Escobar had second thoughts about their agreement. As he waited for the Federal Quick Reaction Force to arrive, Ryan's mind drifted to similar moments in faraway places, the aftermath of combat operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations that would never appear in his official service record. The feeling was always the same. A mixture of relief at survival, analytical assessment of performance, and the quiet clarity that came from facing extreme danger and emerging intact. The valley had been defended, at least for now. Escobar's forces had been repelled with significant casualties. The federal authorities would respond, process the scene, collect evidence, and likely increase security along this section of the border. For the immediate future, at least, Caldwell Valley would remain free of cartel influence. But Ryan harbored no illusions about the broader situation. The economic forces driving cartel expansion remained unchanged. The demand for trafficking routes would continue. If not here, then somewhere else. If not Escobar, then another cartel lieutenant with similar ambitions. The rain drummed steadily on the roof as Ryan maintained his vigilance. Echo lay beside him, occasionally raising her head at distant thunder but otherwise remaining calm in her master's presence. The first indication of the federal response came approximately 40 minutes later, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the north, barely audible above the storm. Through a rain-streaked window, Ryan spotted navigation lights penetrating the low cloud cover. Moments later, his satellite phone vibrated with a message from Jackson, QRF inbound. Multiple agencies responding. Maintain position, hands visible when approached. Ryan acknowledged the instruction and prepared for the federal response. He secured his weapons in visible but non-threatening positions, placed his identification within easy reach, and positioned himself where he could be clearly seen by approaching agents. The helicopters circled the property once before 2 of them landed in the open area beyond his barn. Tactical teams deployed with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter while command elements moved toward the house. Through the rain, Ryan recognized the distinctive tactical gear of an FBI hostage rescue team, the Bureau's premier tactical unit. Behind them came elements of Border Patrol's specialized BORTAC unit and what appeared to be DEA Special Response Team members. Ryan remained motionless, hands visible, as the first agents approached his position. Ryan Caldwell. One called out, weapon at low ready but not directly pointed at him. Affirmative, Ryan responded calmly. Property owner. Former U.S. Army Special Forces. I have identification to my right and weapons secured to my left. The lead agent nodded, maintaining professional caution as he moved closer. I'm Supervisory Special Agent Ramirez, FBI. We need you to step outside, sir. Ryan complied without argument, understanding the protocols involved when civilian use of deadly force intersected with federal jurisdiction. Echo remained inside on his command, watching anxiously through the window as her master was escorted to a position where other agents began documenting his statement. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle as Agent Ramirez conducted his initial interview. We have drone footage of most of the engagement, he informed Ryan. And your Border Patrol contact has provided context about the escalating situation. But I need your first-hand account of what transpired. Ryan provided a detailed, chronological report, beginning with the initial cartel reconnaissance of the valley, progressing through the escalating intimidation of local landowners, and culminating in the armed assault on his property. His account was precise and clinical, devoid of emotional language or self-justification. You engaged approximately 24 armed subjects, solo, resulting in at least 8 confirmed fatalities, Ramirez summarized, his expression professionally neutral but his tone carrying a hint of incredulity. Without sustaining injuries yourself. That's correct, Ryan confirmed. And you're certain the individual commanding the operation was Carlos Escobar? Positive identification. I have prior knowledge of his appearance from my military service and clear visual confirmation during tonight's engagement. Ramirez made additional notes, then glanced toward the southern end of the valley. You permitted their withdrawal rather than attempting to maintain containment until our arrival. What? Tactical assessment, Ryan explained. The storm was intensifying, degrading my surveillance capabilities. They retained numerical superiority and significant firepower. Forcing continued engagement would have elevated the risk of civilian casualties if the conflict expanded beyond my property boundaries. The FBI agent studied him for a moment. Most civilians would have been in shock after the first shots were fired, Mr. Caldwell. You coordinated a complex defensive operation against superior numbers with remarkable effectiveness. I'm not most civilians, Ryan said simply. My military background prepared me for this scenario. Ramirez seemed about to ask another question when his radio crackled with an urgent communication. After listening intently, he turned back to Ryan. We have reports of additional cartel vehicles moving north toward the border, approximately 15 miles southwest of this position, possibly reinforcements that turned back when Escobar withdrew. Ryan absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally he recognized the implication. The operation against his valley had been even larger than it appeared, with secondary elements prepared to exploit success. Sir, I need to coordinate with the other agencies on site, Ramirez said. Please remain available for additional questioning. Technical teams will need access to your property to process evidence. Understood, Ryan replied. I'll cooperate fully. As Ramirez departed to confer with other agency representatives, Ryan looked out across his property. Federal agents swarmed the area, documenting evidence, photographing the dead cartel operators, collecting shell casings and equipment. Lights had been set up despite the continuing rain, illuminating the scene like a macabre film set. In the distance, beyond his burned workshop and damaged home, the valley stretched toward the southern horizon, its rugged beauty temporarily transformed into a crime scene, but still intact. Still American soil. Jackson approached, dressed in tactical Border Patrol gear, but instantly recognizable. You look like hell, Caldwell, he observed. Feel about the same, Ryan admitted. Task Force Command sends their compliments. Jackson continued. The drone footage is already being used to brief officials in Washington. This was the evidence they needed to authorize the expanded border operation they've been pushing for. Ryan nodded, understanding the broader implications. His valley had become the flashpoint that would justify increased federal presence along this section of the border, resources that might otherwise have been directed elsewhere. What happens now, he asked. Full federal response, Jackson replied. Joint Task Force deployment, expanded aerial surveillance, increased border patrol staffing. This corridor is now priority one. He paused, then added, they're also providing protective details for the other landowners who were threatened. Margaret Thornton is already under federal protection at a secure location. Ryan absorbed this information with quiet satisfaction. The system was responding, perhaps belatedly, but with appropriate resources now that the threat had been demonstrated. And Escobar? He asked. Multiple agencies tracking his withdrawal. He crossed the border 30 minutes ago. Mexican authorities have been notified, but... Jackson shrugged, the gesture eloquently conveying the complications of cross-border jurisdiction. He'll go to ground, Ryan predicted. Relocate to another section of the border, reorganize, and try again elsewhere. Probably, Jackson agreed. But not here. Not in this valley. As dawn approached, the rain finally stopped. The eastern sky began to lighten, revealing the full extent of the night's events. Ryan's property bore the scars of combat, shell casings scattered across the ground, impact marks from bullets on buildings and vehicles, the smoldering remains of his workshop, and most significantly, the bodies of cartel operators who had thought the valley would be easily taken. Federal agents continued their methodical work, documenting everything for the investigations and prosecutions that would follow. Helicopters circled overhead, maintaining aerial surveillance of the broader area. Communications equipment crackled with the constant exchange of information between agencies. Ryan stood on his porch, Echo finally permitted to join him, watching the activity with the detached perspective of a man who had seen similar scenes in far-flung corners of the world. The tactical problem had been solved. The strategic implications would unfold in the days and weeks to come. Agent Ramirez approached again, his expression suggesting new developments. Mr. Caldwell, we've received information you should be aware of. Intercepted communications indicate the cartel has placed what they call a blood mark on you, essentially a standing order for your elimination if you're ever encountered in Mexico or border regions. Ryan nodded, unsurprised. Expected. We can arrange protective custody until the situation stabilizes, Ramirez offered. Unnecessary, Ryan replied. This is my home. I'll defend it if needed. Ramirez seemed about to argue, then apparently thought better of it. We'll maintain a presence in the area for the foreseeable future. Multiple agencies, rotating patrols, aerial surveillance. Your property will be under observation, though not as obviously as it is right now. Appreciated, Ryan said simply. As Ramirez departed, Ryan turned his attention to the valley stretching before him. The rising sun illuminated the landscape, revealing its contours and features with increasing clarity. This place, this land, had become more than property to him. It was a line drawn between order and chaos, between law and criminality. The valley had been defended, but the broader battle continued. Ryan Caldwell, former Army Special Forces operator, former designated marksman, current rancher and defender of American soil, understood that better than most. For now, at least, one small piece of the border remained secure, because one man had decided some lines must be held at any cost. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Ryan stood on his newly rebuilt porch, surveying the valley as morning light spilled over the eastern ridge. The physical signs of combat had been largely erased, bullet holes patched, damaged structures repaired, shell casings and evidence collected by federal investigators. Only his workshop remained unrestored, its charred foundation a deliberate reminder of what had happened and what could happen again. The valley itself appeared peaceful. Birds called from the juniper trees, and a family of deer grazed cautiously in the meadow beyond his fence line. To casual observers, Caldwell Valley might seem to have returned to its previous tranquility. But Ryan knew better. The subtle indicators of change were everywhere if you knew what to look for. Border Patrol vehicles made regular passes along the valley roads. Unmarked federal vehicles occasionally appeared at observation points on the surrounding ridges. Surveillance drones, nearly invisible at their operating altitude, maintained a constant presence overhead. This section of the border had become a priority enforcement zone, with resources allocated accordingly. Echo padded silently to his side, her ears perking as she detected the sound of an approaching vehicle long before it became visible. Ryan recognized the distinctive engine noise of Margaret Thornton's pickup truck. "Welcome home," he called as she parked and stepped out. Margaret looked tired but determined, her weathered face set in the stoic expression that had carried her through decades of border country hardship. "Good to be back," she replied, climbing the porch steps to stand beside him. "Federal boys finally decided I'd be safe enough with their patrols running every few hours." She gestured toward the valley. "Place looks different now." Ryan nodded, understanding she meant more than just the physical landscape. "It is different." "Peterson sold out," Margaret said after a moment. "Got his family moved to Phoenix. Can't really blame him after what happened to his place. And Miller, staying, for now at least. Says he'll give it 6 months to see if things really have changed." She turned to face Ryan directly. "You know they're calling you a hero in town. The man who stood against the cartel." Ryan shook his head slightly. "Not interested in that kind of attention. Didn't figure you would be. But people need their stories, especially around here." Margaret studied him carefully. "You doing okay? Sheriff Harker mentioned you've been declining the counseling services the feds offered." A ghost of a smile crossed Ryan's face. "I've seen combat before, Margaret. Processed it before. I'm fine." She seemed unconvinced but didn't press further. Instead, she gazed out at the valley, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Harold used to say that land remembers what happens on it. That violence and peace both leave their mark, even if we can't always see it." Ryan considered this, finding unexpected resonance in the observation. During his deployments, he'd encountered villages and valleys in Afghanistan that seemed permanently marked by generations of conflict, places where violence had become embedded in the very soil. And other locations, sometimes just miles away, that maintained an inexplicable tranquility despite the surrounding chaos. "Your Harold was a wise man," he said finally. "That he was," Margaret agreed. "Also said that the right kind of people, standing in the right places, could make all the difference." She placed a weathered hand briefly on Ryan's arm. "Think he'd have approved of what you did." After Margaret left, Ryan walked the perimeter of his property with Echo. The routine had become more deliberate since the confrontation, not just maintenance, but a tactical assessment. Identifying potential vulnerabilities, noting changes in the landscape, maintaining awareness of approaches and fields of fire. The habits of a lifetime in combat zones reactivated by recent events. His satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number. Ryan answered cautiously. "Caldwell," came a voice he recognized immediately as Agent Ramirez. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Agent. What can I do for you?" "Calling with an update you should be aware of. Carlos Escobar was found dead in Nogales yesterday. Multiple gunshot wounds, professional hit. Internal cartel matter, according to our sources." Ryan absorbed this information without visible reaction, though his mind immediately began calculating implications. Anticipated consequences for failure? "That's our assessment," Ramirez confirmed. "His operation against your valley was unauthorized, apparently. The cartel leadership didn't appreciate the federal attention it generated. And the blood mark our sources indicated died with him. His replacement is focused on rebuilding operations elsewhere, avoiding this section of the border entirely." Appreciated, Ryan said. Anything else I should know? There was a slight pause before Ramirez continued. The task force leadership has authorized me to extend an offer. Your background, combined with your knowledge of this terrain and recent events, would make you valuable as a consultant. Paid position, flexible terms, focusing on cartel counter-operations in this region. Ryan hadn't expected this development. His relationship with federal agencies had always been professional but distant, the natural separation between those who created policy and those who executed it in the field. I'll consider it, he said finally. Send the details to this number. After ending the call, Ryan continued his perimeter walk, processing this new information. Escobar's death wasn't surprising. Cartel organizations typically responded to failure with ruthless efficiency. The removal of the blood mark represented one less complication in his future. But the consulting offer represented something else entirely, a potential new chapter he hadn't anticipated. When he returned to the house, Ryan found Sheriff Harker waiting on his porch, patrol vehicle parked beside the fence. The sheriff looked more rested than Ryan had seen him in weeks, the crisis management phase apparently having given way to a more sustainable operational tempo. Thought I'd check in, Harker said, rising from the porch chair as Ryan approached. See how you're settling back in. Doing fine, Ryan assured him. You look better. Amazing what happens when the feds actually provide resources instead of just demands, Harker observed dryly. Got 2 additional deputies approved, plus overtime funding for increased patrols. Between that and the Border Patrol surge, we've got more law enforcement in the valley than we've had in 20 years. Good to hear. Harker studied him for a moment. You know, for a man who single-handedly held off a cartel assault, you're remarkably unchanged by the experience. Ryan shrugged slightly. Not my first firefight. No, I suppose it isn't. Harker seemed to consider his next words carefully. The thing is, Caldwell, most men would be affected differently. Taking multiple lives, even in clear self-defense, leaves a mark. I've seen it in fellow officers after much less intense situations. I appreciate the concern, Ryan said, recognizing the genuine sentiment behind Harker's words. But I processed these realities long ago, in places far from here. What happened in this valley was tactically complex, but emotionally straightforward. They threatened my home and my neighbors. I defended both. Harker nodded slowly. Simple as that. Simple as that. After the sheriff departed, Ryan went to his workshop site. The federal evidence teams had completed their thorough documentation of the area, removing bullet fragments and cataloging impact patterns for their investigation. The burned structure had been cleared away, leaving only the concrete foundation and the memories of what had happened there. Ryan had decided not to rebuild immediately. Not because of practical limitations, the insurance settlement would cover the costs, but because he wanted the reminder. This scorched rectangle of concrete represented something important, the reality that peace required vigilance, that security was never permanent, that some values were worth defending with force when necessary. He knelt and ran his hand over the fire-archened surface, feeling the residual heat still stored in the material despite the weeks that had passed. Echo watched curiously from a few yards away, her head tilted in canine confusion at her master's interest in the empty space. Ryan's mind drifted to the men who had died here. Not with regret. They had made their choices, aligning themselves with an organization built on violence and corruption, but with a professional acknowledgement of the tactical reality. They had been skilled operators executing a mission they believed was straightforward. They had underestimated both the defender and what he was defending. That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ryan sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey. The satellite phone lay on the table beside him, the details of Ramirez's consulting offer displayed on its screen. The terms were generous, the scope reasonable, the potential impact significant. It represented a path he hadn't considered, a way to continue serving while maintaining his life in the valley. Not active duty, not field operations, but an advisory role leveraging his experience and knowledge to help federal agencies better understand and counter cartel operations along the border. As he considered the offer, Ryan recognized something unexpected within himself. The confrontation had awakened aspects of his nature that had been dormant during his years of quiet ranching. The tactical thinking, the strategic assessment, the calculated application of force, these weren't just skills he possessed. They were integral parts of who he was. Defending the valley had done more than secure his property. It had reintegrated parts of himself that had been compartmentalized since leaving the service. The rancher and the warrior weren't separate identities. They were complementary aspects of the same man. The ringing of his regular cell phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Caldwell," he answered. "Mr. Caldwell, this is James Mitchell from the Veterans Outreach Program in Tucson," came a friendly voice. "I'm calling because we've had several former service members in your area express interest in forming a local chapter of our support network. Your name was mentioned as someone who might be willing to help coordinate." Ryan hadn't expected this. "I appreciate the thought, but I tend to keep to myself." "I understand," Mitchell replied. "But this wouldn't be about you specifically. It's about creating a community resource. The border region has a surprisingly high concentration of veterans, many of whom are isolated from traditional support systems." The concept resonated more than Ryan had anticipated. His recent experience had demonstrated both the vulnerability and resilience of the local community. A structured network of trained veterans could enhance both. What exactly would be involved? He asked. "Monthly meetings, primarily. A communication system for members to stay connected. Occasional training on relevant issues, everything from VA benefits navigation to emergency preparedness." Mitchell paused before adding, "Given recent events in your area, the security aspects might be particularly relevant." Ryan considered the proposal. "Send me the information. I'll think about it." That night, as he prepared for bed, Ryan found himself reflecting on the changes the confrontation had catalyzed, not just in the valley's security posture or the federal presence along the border, but in his own understanding of his place in this community. For 5 years, he had been the quiet rancher in Caldwell Valley, acknowledged but largely unknown by his neighbors. The former soldier had been a background detail, referenced occasionally when his expertise proved useful but otherwise subsumed beneath the civilian identity he constructed. The cartel incursion had changed that equation permanently. His neighbors now knew precisely what kind of man lived among them. The federal agencies had a clear understanding of his capabilities. And perhaps most significantly, he had reconnected with aspects of himself that no amount of peaceful ranching could fully suppress. In defending his valley, Ryan Caldwell had undergone a transformation, not becoming someone new, but rather integrating all aspects of who he had always been. The disciplined soldier, the precise marksman, the tactical thinker, the defender of American soil. These weren't roles he had played. They were essential elements of his character that had found expression when circumstances demanded. As he drifted towards sleep, Ryan's mind calculated possibilities for the future. The consulting position offered a way to channel his expertise toward constructive ends. The Veterans Network provided an opportunity to strengthen community resilience. Both represented ways to serve that aligned with his nature while allowing him to maintain his life in the valley he had defended. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a crispness in the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Ryan rose before sunrise, as always, and stood on his porch watching the eastern sky brighten. Echo sat beside him, alert and content in her master's presence. In the distance, a border patrol vehicle moved slowly along the southern access road, its regular patrol a visible reminder of the changed security situation. Overhead, the faint whine of a surveillance drone drifted on the morning breeze, electronic eyes maintaining constant watch over the valley floor. Ryan surveyed his domain with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had defended what mattered when called upon to do so. The valley stretched before him, peaceful in the morning light, its natural beauty unmarred by the brief violence that had erupted within its boundaries. This was his home, not just the ranch house and property, but the entire valley that now bore his name. He had claimed it not just through legal purchase, but through blood and fire when necessary. In doing so, he had transformed from merely a resident to a guardian, from a retired soldier to an active defender of American soil. As the sun cleared the eastern ridge, bathing the valley in golden light, Ryan made his decision. He would accept both the consulting position and the role with the Veterans Network, not for recognition or compensation, but because they represented extensions of the commitment he had already demonstrated to secure this border region, to strengthen his community, to continue serving in ways that matched his unique capabilities. The transformation was complete. Ryan Caldwell, former Army Special Forces operator, had found a new mission that integrated all aspects of who he was. The quiet rancher remained, but now openly aligned with the skilled warrior who had always existed beneath the surface. Both were essential parts of the man who had drawn a line in Caldwell Valley, a line the cartels had tested once and would not test again. 6 months after the confrontation, Caldwell Valley had settled into a new normal. Federal presence remained consistent but unobtrusive. Regular patrols, aerial surveillance, and intelligence gathering had become part of the background rhythm of life along this section of the border. The cartel threat had not disappeared, but it had been redirected elsewhere, away from the valley that had proven too costly to contest. Ryan stood at the edge of his property, watching as vehicles turned into the newly graveled driveway of the community center that now occupied the former Peterson Ranch. The monthly meeting of the Veterans Support Network was about to begin, with nearly 30 former service members from across the region gathering to share resources, training, and camaraderie. What had started as a small support group had evolved into something more significant, a community resilience network that combined practical skills training with mutual assistance. Today's agenda included a Border Patrol presentation on recognizing cartel surveillance, followed by a workshop on emergency communications systems. Ryan had initially been reluctant to take a leadership role, preferring to contribute quietly. But his experience and evident capabilities had naturally drawn others to seek his guidance. He had found himself becoming not just a participant, but a central figure, someone whose judgment was respected and whose tactical insights were valued. Sheriff Harker's patrol vehicle pulled alongside Ryan's position. "Quite a turnout," the sheriff observed, nodding toward the gathering. "Your folks have made a real difference around here. Response times are down, community reporting is up, and we've got better situational awareness than ever before." Ryan nodded in acknowledgement. Good people doing what they've always done, serving where needed. The federal consulting work going well. Productive, Ryan confirmed. His advisory role with the Joint Task Force had expanded beyond initial expectations, his unique combination of military expertise and local knowledge proving valuable in developing counter-cartel strategies specifically adapted to border terrain. Margaret Thornton's truck approached, stopping beside them. "You boys coming in, or just admiring the view?" she called out with characteristic directness. As they walked toward the community center, Ryan felt Echo alert beside him, her attention drawn to the southern horizon. Following her gaze, he spotted a Border Patrol helicopter making a routine sweep along the valley's outer perimeter, a visible reminder of the ongoing vigilance that had become standard in the months since the confrontation. The valley remained secure, not because the threat had been eliminated, but because the response had been decisive. The coordinated efforts of federal agencies, local law enforcement, and community networks had transformed what the cartels had once viewed as a vulnerable corridor into one of the most closely monitored sections of the border. Ryan had played his part in that transformation, not as a hero, a label he continued to reject, but as someone who understood that security required both vigilance and cooperation. Individual resolve supported by collective commitment. The cartel's defeat was undeniable. Though some questioned the extent of Ryan's actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Ryan, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. His story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth that genuine strength lies not in aggression, but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.